Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, and I'm honored to serve as Associate Minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your heart, your mind, and your spirit. We welcome all that you are carrying with you today and all that you long to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests joining us today. If you are visiting for the first time or joining us from afar today, why don't you say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from? Welcome. I welcome you to our worship service by inviting you to repeat our mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. These opening words are called Harbingers of Frost by Robert T. Weston. Autumn, we know, is life en route to death. The asters are but harbingers of frost. The trees flaunting their colors at the sky in other times will follow where the leaves have fallen, and so shall we. Yet other lives will come. So may we know, accept, embrace the mystery of life we hold a while, nor mourn that it outgrows each separate self, but still rejoice that we may have our day. Lift high our colors to the sky and give in our time fresh glory to the earth. Let's return to our beloved sanctuary for the lighting of the flaming chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
Hello everyone, my name is Miles Schuler and I have the pleasure of serving as worship associate today. My grandma Pris was an avid angler. Even through her last summer with us, she insisted on going out to fish every night, always in the same bay on the lake our family cabin sits on. Though her perseverance was admirable, I don't recall her ever catching a good fish. My mom likes to tell the story of how my grandma's sister, who never went fishing, decided to join her one day and caught the impressive walleye that hangs in my family cabin. Needless to say, my grandma never forgave her for that. My great-grandfather bought our cabin when my grandma was in high school, just after World War II. Look around the one-room log structure and you'll find a collection of photo albums and slides, furniture with flowers painted by my great-grandmother, a door frame with 4 generations of height markings, and countless other objects that connect us to all who came before. Though I never met most of these relatives, or was too young to build a relationship with them, I always feel a connection to them when I'm at the cabin. Little has changed over the past 75 odd years. We still have the outhouse that used to be the only bathroom. Our family friends still own the adjacent cabin. The tree that curves over the stairs to the lake can be found in the earliest photos. When I'm there, it feels like I'm literally walking in my ancestors' footsteps. In this way, visiting the cabin has become a spiritual practice for me. Coming into adulthood and focusing on my self-discovery, I noticed the lack of knowledge I had on my ancestors as people. Most of my information was place-based, involving the cabin and the town where generations of my family were born and raised. I couldn't tell you what their personal stories were or how they got to those places. About a year ago, I asked my mom, our designated family historian, for all the documentation she had about our genealogy. I wanted to see where I fit into it all. Naturally, I brought everything with me to the cabin to start my research. I laid everything out on the dining table, organized the documents into piles by family branch, and began meeting the people whose lives led to mine. Very quickly, I noticed that the further back in time I went, the less connected I felt to those people. This preliminary research helped me see more of the overarching story of my existence, but any connection I had to those people only existed on paper. The emotional connection was missing, the kind I feel when I fish in my grandma's bay. In a last-ditch effort to find something meaningful, I stumbled on the burial place of my third great-grandfather, Albro Parker. This is someone I grew up hearing about, a Civil War veteran who witnessed General Lee's surrender and lived long enough to meet his great-grandson, my Grandpa Bob. The cemetery happened to be on the way home from the cabin, so my mom suggested we stop by to visit. It was a very small cemetery, one that you have to know about to notice. It didn't take long to find a white, weathered gravestone that said Albro R. Parker. My mom cleared the snow from an adjacent gravestone that read Sarah, Albro's wife. Looking to the right were Ira and Letitia, Albro's parents. My heart filled with excitement from this discovery, but only briefly. I had not read anything about Letitia. That branch of my tree only documented the male line. I left the cemetery with an odd mix of feelings, both a strengthened connection to Albro and disconnect from Letitia, who I likely won't ever learn much about. Ultimately, I realized there is only so much we can know about our ancestors. But through my genealogy research, I'm discovering how my relationship with the world came to be because of their relationship with the world. And in that way, I'm able to connect with them.
Please join me in singing hymn number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life. Blessed Spirit of my life, give me strength through stress and strife. Help me live with dignity. Let me know serenity. Fill me with all vision, clear my mind of fear and confusion. When my thoughts flow restlessly, let peace find a home in me. Spirit of great mystery, hear the still small voice in me. Help me live my wordless creed as I comfort those in need. Fill me with compassion, be the source of my intuition. Then when life is done for me, let love be my legacy.
Thank you, Nicole and Tristan, for sharing one of our favorite hymns. That was beautiful. By some calculations, 50% of people in the world have lost someone to COVID-19 during this global pandemic. By some measures, an average of 9 people are connected to each person who died of COVID and thus affected by their loss. And of course, people continue to die from many other causes during this time. The global population is experiencing a grief pandemic. We are living in a time of prolonged, cumulative, and complicated grief. We suffer from death losses and non-death losses on a scale most of us have not experienced before. Yet the culture at large does not understand grief or support the grieving process. We are supposed to just get over it. But here's a truth. We are never done grieving. It just changes form. Grief educator and chaplain Doug Smith said, "Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is an experience to be carried." Our task is to find a way to carry grief as a survivor and not a victim. On this Halloween day, the pagan holiday of Samhain, so close to the Christian observance of All Saints and All Souls days, and the Mexican observance of Dia de los Muertos, it behooves us to name another truth. Our relationship with our deceased loved ones also doesn't end. It just changes form. If we acknowledge this and explore it a bit, we might be able to do a better job of caring for ourselves and one another during this time of collective loss. Maury Schwartz wrote in Tuesdays with Maury, "Death ends a life, not a relationship." At First Church, our theme of the month is cultivating relationships. So we ask today, what does it mean to cultivate a relationship with the dead? One answer, it means to honor them. There are so many ways to honor our dead. Military honors for veterans at their funerals, and attending ceremonies on Memorial Day, doing activities that our lost loved one also enjoyed doing, writing them a letter expressing our gratitude, planting a tree in their honor, visiting their grave or the place their ashes were released, curating photos of their life and sharing them with family and friends, telling stories about their life to others, writing down stories of their life before we forget, genealogy research, making charitable donations or volunteering with causes they supported, private rituals of remembrance like lighting a candle on the anniversary of their death or their birthday or the wedding anniversary, living out their values in our own lives, carrying on their legacy. I'm sure you can add more ideas of how to honor your departed loved ones. Feel free to write your ideas in the chat. There are also some specific grieving tools we can use alone or with others to both honor our dead and support our grieving process. I'm going to share with you two of the tools I learned about from Doug Smith. One is called creating a memory jar. And here's how it goes. You find a jar, put it in a designated place where all the people in your household can find it and reach it. You leave some blank slips of paper and a writing utensil near the jar. Each time a family member thinks of their lost loved one and remembers a specific memory, they can go to the jar and write down what they're thinking or feeling, or describe that specific memory and put the piece of paper in the jar. If you live alone, you can decide on a special time when you'll sit down undisturbed, maybe play a favorite piece of music, maybe light a candle, and then read aloud the slips of paper in the memory jar. If you live with your family or friends, you can decide together when you will gather to do this. Maybe the first day of the month or the last day of the month. Afterward, you can return the slips of paper to the jar so you read all of them each time you sit down for the memory jar ritual, or you can save them in an envelope and start fresh each month. Maybe a fresh envelope at the end of each month, whenever you're done reading the slips of paper for that month. If you label the envelopes by month at the end of the first year of grieving, you can read them all and perhaps notice how your memories and your grief has changed over time. Another tool Doug Smith shares is an important way to honor your lost loved one during the winter holidays, which can be an especially painful time to be grieving. It's called the gratitude package. It operates similarly to the memory jar. You find a box with a lid, put it in a designated place where all the people in your household can reach it. Leave some blank slips of paper and a writing utensil near the box. Each time a member of your household thinks of something that they are grateful for about the person who died, they go to the box and write it down on a slip of paper and put the piece of paper in the box. Right before the major winter holiday that you celebrate, maybe it's winter solstice, Hanukkah, Diwali, Christmas, Kwanzaa, you wrap the box in holiday gift wrapping and put it where the household can open it together during your celebration of the winter holiday. Maybe it's a package under the tree. On the holiday, you open the gratitude package and read aloud all the slips of paper. This grieving tool embodies the reality that you still have a relationship with your lost loved one, and they continue to give to you. A couple of weeks ago, I attended a webinar about grief and COVID, where clinicians Erica Srinivasan and Doug Smith presented information about pandemic loss and grief. They were careful to name losses that are not due to death and said that comparing and downplaying our losses as if they are not worthy of grieving is not helpful. For our mental health, it is essential to name and grieve our losses, whatever they are. Non-death losses during the pandemic include loss of employment and income, loss of routine and sense of normalcy, loss of social world and physical touch, loss of control, loss of assumptive world and a predictive future, loss of weddings, graduations, memorial services and funerals, loss of communal relationships, If you had a sense of safety in the world, and not everybody does, then you probably lost that sense. I'm sure you can add to this list. Srinivasan and Smith agreed that identifying different types of grief, all of which are in play during the pandemic, can be useful. Some of the types of grief that they named: vicarious grief. When we feel vicariously the grief of others, there is a lot of this during a pandemic when everyone is touched by loss. Anticipatory grief. When we feel grief about potential or impending future losses. The climate of fear and anxiety during a pandemic stimulates anticipatory grief. Cumulative grief is grief from losses that happen one after another that have not been addressed. Those who have witnessed multiple deaths, such as healthcare workers, first responders, people of color, or those who had just lost many friends and acquaintances, know what this kind of grief is. Cumulative grief. You just can't pay attention to all of your losses because there are too many. So they accumulate and wait for you to feel them. Disenfranchised grief comes from loss where you feel like you don't have a right to grieve. Grief that cannot or is not openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported is disenfranchised grief. In 2016, This American Life radio show aired a segment called Really Long Distance by Mickey Meek. She reported on what was happening in Japan as survivors marked the 5th anniversary of the March 2011 tsunami that killed 19,000 people. She went to Otsuchi, Japan, a village that was destroyed in 30 minutes during the tsunami and had the highest number of missing people. She reported on an improvisational grief tool that began to be used by people who wanted a way to communicate with their lost loved ones. A year before the tsunami, a man had bought an old phone booth, painted white with glass windows, with a black rotary phone inside that sat on a wooden shelf and wasn't connected to anything. He installed the old phone booth in his garden on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He used the phone booth as a place to talk to his cousin who had died. It was his way to stay connected to the dead. He said he wanted his thoughts carried on the wind, and the phone booth became known in the neighborhood as the wind telephone. News of the wind telephone traveled far and wide. After the tsunami, people began showing up randomly to use the wind telephone. At the 5-year anniversary, a TV crew set up an audio recording system inside the booth and aired segments to both honor the dead and the profound losses of grieving survivors. One woman who lost her husband in the tsunami came alone, went into the phone booth, dialed the rotary phone, saying each number out loud, then stood in silence, holding the phone to her ear. Tears ran down her face. Eventually, she hung up, stared at the floor in silence for a while, and left. Meek said that most of the people used the wind telephone to give their deceased loved ones straightforward updates about life and to reassure them by saying things like, "Grandma's doing fine." Interestingly, more men than women came to use the wind telephone. A man who lost his mother, his wife, and his daughter said into the wind phone, "Where are you? Are you staying warm? Are you eating? Come back soon. I'll build a house for us." Meek noticed that phone calls like these were understated ways to say, "I love you, I miss you," which people in Japan don't typically say. The phone calls were also a way to express regrets. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." Or survivor's guilt. "I don't know why I'm here and you're not." And to simply say, "Don't worry about me. I'm doing my very best. I'm enduring." I was very moved by listening to this segment, really long distance. Here were individuals and families, some who traveled many hours to use the wind telephone in the man's garden, on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean, to talk to their departed loved ones, a phone which they knew was connected to nowhere. I wonder if there was a wind telephone in your neighborhood, who would you call and what would you say to them? Our rational mind might find the wind telephone phenomenon hard to believe, but you know, and I know, that grief isn't rational. Grief is the normal human reaction to loss. Grief is universal and yet manifests uniquely with each person. We don't go through grief in neat, tidy stages. Grief is not linear. It comes in waves we do not expect. Grief is not a problem to be solved, as Doug Smith said. It is an experience we learn to carry. We are never done grieving. Our grief just changes form over time. And through working with grief, grief can be hard work, something you might not want to undertake alone. You might want the support of your ministers, your faith community, a professional counselor, a close friend. And remember, when you grieve, even though you may feel alone, you are not alone. Many hearts are beating with you. Friends, we are living in a grief pandemic. It is essential for our mental and spiritual health that we allow ourselves to grieve. During times of massive social, societal loss, and times of deeply personal loss, Humans need ways to process their grief, integrate their loss with their sense of the world as it is now, and somehow stay connected to the dead. I'll end with a poem which poignantly expresses the yearning of love and loss embedded in the turning of the seasons here in the Northern Hemisphere. The poem is called The Promise by Jane Hirschfield. Stay, I said to the cut flowers. They bowed their heads lower. Stay, I said to the spider, who fled. Stay, leaf. It reddened, embarrassed for me and itself. Stay, I said to my body. It sat as a dog does, obedient for a moment, soon starting to tremble. Stay to the earth of riverine valley meadows, of fossiled escarpments, of limestone and sandstone. It looked back with a changing expression in silence. Stay, I said to my loves. Each answered, always. These closing words are adapted from Roland B. Gittleson. We remember them. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.